Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first of many videos dealing with topics, stories, movies, and other media that we here at King's Advisors love. As I said a while back, this series will be a more lighthearted take of ours, looking really just at stuff that we like. It's not going to be a critique, we're not going to pick apart scenes and talk about why this doesn't make sense or why this is stupid. We're not really going to complain a lot in these. And again, this series of videos will include a bunch of different takes, either from me, Dan, or myself, or me and other guests. Today's video is just yours truly. There are several ways that I wanted to start this series, and several topics that I wanted to begin with. Many of those, however, I want to do with Danny. So, for my first solo topic, we're going to talk about the 2004 masterpiece and runner up for Best Picture, Master and Commander The Far Side of the World. Master Commander is one of those movies that makes every list of my top movies. For me, it's in my top 5 best movies of all time. It's my favorite Russell Crowe movie. It's my favorite Paul Bettany movie. It's my favorite sailing movie. It's my favorite English movie. It's my favorite Napoleonic movie. I could go on. Had Return of the King come out the next year, I truly believe Master Commander would have crushed the Oscars in 2004. It was nominated for 10 Oscars and it won 2 of them, Best Cinematography and Best Sound Editing. With the exception of one time, every time you heard Lord of the Rings, Return of the King listed in a category, right there with it was Master and Commander, Far Side of the World. For anyone that hasn't seen it, I recommend watching it. Stop this and go watch it, and then come back and see if you agree with me. Now, this isn't supposed to be a review. I'm not going to do a scene by scene discussion. It's supposed to be what I love about Master and Commander. So, number 1, Russell Crowe. Russell Crowe plays Lucky Jack Aubrey, the captain of HMS Surprise, and does it perfectly. I honestly think he plays Jack better than he plays General Maximus. And what you have to remember is this is at what honestly I think was the height of Russell Crowe's acting career. This movie came out in 2003. 2 years earlier, he played John Nash in A Beautiful Mind. A year before that, Maximus in Gladiator. 3 years before that, he was in 3 different movies. One of them was LA Confidential. He's in several other good movies later. I thought he was good at American Gangster. I liked him in 3:10 to Yuma. And I really enjoyed his take on Robin Hood. But this is the movie that I think of when I think of Russell Crowe. I remember when I first saw it. I saw it with my dad in our living room on an old box TV. And I just remember being fascinated by the setting. I mean, think about this. The entire movie, with the exception of a couple of minutes on one of the Galapagos Islands, takes place on the boat. So I'm 8 years old watching this. I might have been 9, but I think it was 8. And the movie starts, and a placard comes up. April 1805. Napoleon is master of Europe. Only the British fleet stands before him. Oceans are now battlefields. I just remember not knowing what any of that meant. I didn't know who Napoleon was. I didn't know that he had conquered all of Europe. I had no idea. So my dad pauses the movie 10 and a half seconds into the movie and kind of gives me a very quick rundown. See, he was a history major, so he actually really loved doing it. One of the things that I really love about this movie is it reminds me of this time that I spent with my dad. It's not like my dad isn't here or anything. He's still alive. He's still with us. But it's one of those moments that I just kind of keep tucked away that I just love remembering. Now, after that placard disappears, we see the dark ocean, and then we get to see the HMS Surprise. And here, Admiralty orders to Captain J. Aubrey intercept French privateer Acheron en route to Pacific, intent on carrying the war into those waters. Sink, burn, or take her a prize. And then my dad had to pause the movie again to explain what a prize meant. And I just remember the first couple of moments watching this movie and seeing how lively the boat was. Even in the morning before people had really woken up, you've got them grabbing eggs for breakfast. You've got the morning watch going on. You've got people checking to see how fast they're going. You've got people staying by. You've got the Marine Guard on duty. And then they beat the quarters. Luckily, I was able to figure out what beating the quarters meant without having to ask my dad. And then you get to see Russell Crowe as Jack Aubrey. And he shows up on deck. He asks his midshipman, "Why'd you beat the quarters?" The midshipman explains. Conversation ensues. And then all hell breaks loose. The Acheron starts firing from the mist. I just remember it being crazy, just being completely surprised that they were able to film this. Now, one of the really awesome things about this movie is just about every single wide shot where the camera isn't literally on the boat is an actual filmed scene. It's not CG. So when they bought the boat, I believe they bought it from like the Boston area. They sailed it to LA and they filmed all these tracking shots, these wide angle shots during that trip. And for instance, there's a scene about halfway through the movie where Jack has captained the ship to come up right behind the Acheron. And that shot is an actual shot. There's no CG. Well, I think there might have been CG because off in the distance you see the Acheron. But beyond that, that's it. It's all wide angle shots, practical effects. And that's one of the great things about basically pre-Marvel movies is the huge use of practical effects. And like I said, this isn't a negativity thing. I'm not going to sit here and talk about why practical is better than CG. What I will say is at any moment that you're able to use practical, you should, because practical looks better on the screen than CG does. Now, back to what I love about this movie. So there's a young actor playing one of the midshipmen. He's probably like the second or third son of a lord, which is why he's in the Navy. And he gets hurt and his arm gets broken. He gets some splinters in his arm from the shots that the Acheron fires. And my dad had to explain. Luckily, he didn't pause the movie this time, but he explained to me why that was such a big deal because medicine obviously wasn't as advanced as it is today back then. And that kind of an injury would cause sepsis and kill you, especially if the bone wasn't set right. So anyone that's seen the movie knows he eventually loses his arm, and he loses like his forearm. And Paul Bettany, and there's this scene between him, Paul Bettany, and a couple other crewmen. And Paul Bettany is the doctor, and he's doing surgery on him. He's getting ready to cut off his arm. And so you see all the old implements. He rolls open the thing of knives. He puts this clamp on the arm to stop the flow of blood, and then proceeds to cut the arm off. Obviously, not literally, but the camera is trained on this kid's face the whole time. And the acting is just so well done. And he finishes, and Stephen, the character's name is Stephen, says, "I've never had a braver patient." There's this acting, there's this look in Paul's eyes that are you buy in. There's no suspension of belief. You just buy in, and I love it. So the movie goes on. A bunch of stuff happens, and eventually the ship pops up again, and it pops up about a day's sail behind them. And so they're trying to basically get away, and they decide to kind of build a raft to distract them. So they build this raft that has 4 lights on it that's supposed to mimic the lights on the back of the Surprise. And they put a sail on it, and it eventually they drop in the water behind the ship and they get away, which I think is just a brilliant tactic. I mean, that's some thinking right there. Another reason why you gotta love the movie. It's just there's intelligence wrapped up in this movie that doesn't require you to be a Rhodes Scholar to understand. But they also don't tell you what's happening on the screen that it requires you to actually think, which I think makes for a really good movie. Another thing that I love about this movie is the human element of it. In such a confined space, you have so many different classes of people. You got that midshipman who just got injured. Now, he and most of the other midshipmen or officers probably would have been lower aristocracy. They would have been maybe sons of doctors. They would have been men of means and probably not exceptional means. Like there probably is no second or third son of a duke in the British Navy, but there would have been sons of wealthy merchants. There would have been sons of doctors, maybe a third son of an earl, that type of thing. But then you've got the lowest of the low. You've got people who have been pressed into service. There would have been people that would have ended up in debtor's jail if they didn't go into the Navy. So it truly is kind of a small city. You got all these different types of people. The interaction between them is quite amazing. Obviously, you got everyone saluting, and there's a manner of respect that's commanded by the Articles of War and traditions at sea. But beyond that, you can see in these sailors a respect for Jack that's been earned through his many years at sea. They believe in him. Stephen later says they would follow you to the gates of hell, rightly believing in victory, as they should. So both Danny and I have said multiple times about how big fans we are of fantasy. The problem with fantasy is one of the things that it requires is the suspension of belief. It requires the viewer to just go along and accept that this is what's happening. Don't pick it apart. Don't try to point out why this doesn't make sense. You know, when you're watching Star Wars, you don't sit there and explain why the Force isn't real. You just accept it. The Force exists. But you don't have to do that in this movie. This movie is a true story. Now, not literally, the HMS Surprise is not a real ship. But beyond that, beyond the names, this battle would have taken place. A ship of of the class of the Surprise would have fought a French frigate. They would have boarded. They would have done it. Everything they did would have happened in the English Channel during the Napoleonic Wars. And I think that's one of the things that brings a sense of realism that doesn't require you to suspend belief. It actually invites scrutiny. And I think that in of itself is incredible. That's almost like saying, look closer, judge us harder. And so after some stuff happens, we get the big fight. We get what's been set up the whole time, the fight between the Acheron and the HMS Surprise. And it's an amazing fight. The Surprise actually on the larboard battery. So larboard was used by the English Navy until I think about the 1850s. That's when everyone started using port and starboard. Before that, it was starboard and larboard. So what they do is they take the rear wheels off the cannons on the larboard battery. Now that allows for more elevation, which allows them to hit the mainmast, but it does not allow for another shot. They can't shoot again because they've lost recoil. So they have to basically take their one shot, get it done, and then board, which is obviously what they do, and they win and all that. I've got to say, I think the ship combat is probably one of the best examples of tall ship combat that I've ever seen. So ships with sails are called tall ships, literally because they're tall. You know, the combat you see in it, it's better, you know, it's better than Pirates of the Caribbean. It's better than any of those TV shows that we got in the 90s and the early 2000s. There really isn't much better example of sail combat than Master and Commander. And it's done so beautifully as well. I've said the same thing many times, but the choice to use practical on this. Now, obviously, you know, when they fire the Acheron fires a grape shot at one point near the beginning of the movie. Obviously, they haven't actually fired a grape shot onto the ship, but everything that isn't real is done so well that it looks real. And I think that's one of the things that makes this movie feel so true. It doesn't require suspension of belief. It allows you to view it and critique it and judge it as if you're sitting on the deck of a boat in 1820 watching this battle take place. My final thoughts are a great example of the dedication that a lot of this cast and a lot of the crew had to this movie was Paul Bettany and Russell Crowe, the lead characters, had to, well, didn't have to. One of the things that they do in the books, because the movie's based on one of the Patrick O'Brian Aubrey novels. And in the novels, Aubrey and his friend Stephen, who's the doctor, they play the cello and the violin. And Paul Bettany and Russell Crowe learned how to play their instruments so they could actually play them and not just kind of fiddle around with them and then dub in music later. And I think that's such an excellent example of dedication to the film. And I think it's an excellent example of one of the things that makes the movie so good. I'm glad to have done this. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do my first solo one on. Again, like I said at the beginning, if you haven't watched this movie, you should go watch it. I'm actually probably going to go watch it again right now after I finish uploading the video. As always, everyone, thank you so much. Please comment below what your favorite Russell Crowe movie. If you want to list out your top favorite movies, I said earlier this is in my top favorite movies. List those out. Maybe you'll give us some suggestions on what you think we should do. And if you have seen Master and Commander, comment on what are your favorite moments. What do you think makes the movie so good? Do you think it's a bad movie? If you think it's a bad movie, tell us why, and maybe we'll respond to it. As always, thank you so much. I'm Caleb. Please like, subscribe, and follow us on Twitter at KingSadvisors_.